So after I was done with that whole horrid episode, uh, we stayed there not much longer. That's sort of another reason how I got out of that problem. Well, we ended up moving, and that changed a lot of things. We ended up moving uh, across town, almost actually. If you looked at a map in those days, we would have moved from the very furthest uh, upper left-hand corner of the town to the very furthest lower right-hand corner of the town, and across the river, away from the core of the town. And we found a nice apartment, which was also a low rental place, but it was way better kept. And we had very nice neighbors, and it was the last place that I would end up having as a home base. And mother would that would be her last move. So things after that happened, with the Up Home Tonight deal and the me starting to go around to festivals and stuff. A lot of things started to happen, and happened very, very quickly. And again, it was all just people that came into my life and provided me opportunities. Just out of the goodness of their heart. And there was just so much going on. It's kind of difficult to even get a grip on it, because when I look at the time frame, we kind of left off on the last episode when I was around 13 years old. So when I was 14, a whole bunch of things started happening. Probably the easiest way to do this, and there really isn't any easy way to do it, because I'm probably gonna, this section of my life, it's absolutely unbelievable what happened to me in the 9 years between the ages of 13 and 22. It's absolutely unbelievable. When I look back at it, it's so overwhelming to try to tell this story, because some of it is so unlikely and unbelievable that it's, some of it's just hard to. I even look back on it sometimes and go, like, did that really happen? That can't really have happened, but it did. And so I think I'm gonna try to break this. I'm gonna break this up into sort of different categories, and because there's so many things. There's kind of no way to follow a single line through this minefield of events. One of the big things that happened in this time frame was I finished grade 9 out in Hebville at the junior high school. And plus we had moved by then to the upper part of town, so I was too far away from the central school to go to the Bridgewater High School. So I ended up getting to go to this high school outside of town on a bus. I guess I don't know why that was how that they decided that, but it was a great thing, because I ended up going to a place called the Parkview Education Center, which was this brand new high-tech building that held 1,100 students. And it was that was the most fun I ever had in school. Was I only was there a year. I went there for grade 10, and going to that school, I made some friends that would alter my life. And the two that I mean, there were so many of them. There's so many people there that I became close with. There was a nerd squad, of course, because I was a nerd deluxe. So there was a bunch of us that hung around together who all played D&D and enjoyed. We would actually, design costumes and build armor and swords and out of wood and go out in the woods and like do D&D for real. Like it was hilarious. We had so much fun with it. And I was always in the woods when I was a kid. It just was a thing. I liked to be out in the woods. And so we had this crew of guys, like they were all super intelligent and super funny as hell. Some of them are musicians. There was one of my best buddies, two of my best buddies actually, Neil Alt, and who's now an archaeologist. Unbelievable, his life. I haven't seen him in years, but he did incredibly well. And Lenny Bowles, he's a big goofy guy that knew and we knew every line from Monty Python. And Robbie Burke and Neil. Oh, now I'm not going to be able to call his name. Damn it! I'm sorry, Neil. You know who you are. And Graham Levy. Graham was one of the funniest guys. And oh my God, we had so much fun. It was we laughed and laughed and laughed, and the bullying kind of went down because we were getting bigger. I grew up. I started to sprout at that point. I was getting up over 6 feet and was pretty well solid muscle. And but so people picked on me less, and plus there was more of us together. They were all in the same kind of boat. So, and Parkview didn't tolerate that shit, right? That there was a good school, had good administration. There were some great teachers, fantastic teachers, and so yeah, that started to alter, all of that, and the other guys that I met there, the musical people I met there, really changed things up for me. A guy named John Higney, who was a world-class blues guitar electric player, but he was also a classical guitar player. And there was a back stairwell in Parkview that was right outside the music room door on the top. There was 2 floors in this school. It was huge. And there was a back stairwell there. And the acoustics were incredible, and nobody ever went up and down it because it was the music school. It was the music room. Like not many people were down there. There was literature in that hallway, English literature, and a few other strange. You could pick your courses at the school, right? So I don't mean English literature is strange, but it's just not something I would always consider to be a college course. But they were given those courses at the high school. It was great, and so that back stairwell became this focal point for all the serious musicians. And John would go in there and play the guitar in the stairwell, and I used to hang out with him. And he turned me on to things like Julian Bream and John Williams, and I already had a love of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and all the big classics, right? But he really turned me on to Bach hard, and I realized how difficult the music was. So I started to learn it. And there was a black Yamaha classical guitar that the school had bought for us. And you could take it home on the weekends. And so John would take it, I would take it, John would take it. And that guitar became a vehicle for all these things that I was developing musically that weren't Chet and Jerry. Strangely enough, I was pushing out of Americana altogether and going. So like the growth spurt that I had physically matched the one I was having musically. Another guy used to hang around that back stairwell who really blew up my world was a guy from Mahone Bay named Chris Tanner. And everybody called him Chink because it's a terrible name, sorry, but they called him Chink because he had like really slitted eyes, and he was always laughing, so his eyes were always really like that, and he was so funny, and he had a space between his front teeth, so that was like, but he embraced the nickname even though it was derogatory, I suppose. And Chris was, what a talent that guy was. Holy God. He was an incredible singer, and he knew every classic rock song and Americana song and old country song, and was a great guitar player, wicked rhythm player, just a really, really good guitar player. And so me and him really got close. We started to play music together at that time, and I started to go out to Mahone Bay. I would get drives out there. My mother didn't really want me to go, but I'd get rides out there. You know, on a Friday night after school, I'd get a ride out to Mahone Bay to Chris's house, and him and his mom lived alone there, at this big old house, and she wasn't around very much. She had her own sort of life going on, and she would be around, but not a whole lot. And me and Chris we got into all kinds of trouble. Like, I mean, alcohol was a no-brainer. We always found a way to get beer, hard liquor, whatever. Chris, you know, would have a joint every now and then. I was never really into it. I started to try it out there, and it didn't do anything for me, so I never kept doing it. But he was part of that South Shore community that was filled with the tough guys, the fishermen, you know, and they were good guys, you know, like they were always, you know, everywhere we went to a party or something to jam or whatever, there'd always be, you know, somebody'd have some hash, somebody'd have some beer and liquor, and we party all weekend long. And I wasn't even of age, and but it didn't matter. I mean, because we never were in any danger. We didn't have a car, so we'd have to walk everywhere we went, and but we spent most of our time being musicologists. He had a massive record collection. He introduced me to bands that I'd never heard. He introduced me to bands like Pink Floyd and the Rolling Stones, which I knew about but had never really listened to. The Rolling Stones was his favorite band. He knows every song, has every record, and just all kinds of stuff that would come up way later in my career that I would never have experienced without Chris pulling an LP out and going, "Hey, John, check this out. You listen to this." And he'd put this LP on, and we'd just sit there and kind of freak and listen to it. And like, I heard "Saucer Full of Secrets" with Chris for the first time, and the Dark Side of the Moon album, and like all of these things. And we had such common tastes. Like, he was a horror film buff, and so was I. And the first time I ever seen The Evil Dead was at his house during a get-together. We had a movie night. We decided we were going to try to scare the crap out of ourselves, and we went down to the corner store and rented a couple of movies, and 5 or 6 of us got together and watched this movie, which was really slow and stupid at the beginning, which then turned into just an absolute gore fest. And it freaked me out, and it made me love horror movies even more, and special effects and stunts, and like just all the stuff that I was so, anything that had to do with creation, I was overwhelmed with it. I was just wanting to, any kind of art form that I could look at and go, wow, I wonder what was behind, what went into that. That's what interested me. It drew me. It always did draw me, and music just happened to be one of the things that I got good at myself. But I would have been happy going into film or acting or I don't know what, anything that had to do with creation. That was my biggest passion. Chris had an old banjo, an Aida, or however they pronounce that. It was a pretty crappy old banjo, but and that's playing that thing was where I started to learn how to work on instruments to make them sound better, and I started modifying things so that I could play them, because I had no money. He didn't. He had even less, I think, and we were both children of single moms, and so it was like you had to, if you could get your hands on an instrument, you needed to know how to make it playable. So that banjo was a big lesson for me on how to make things work better. And him and I started composing these really complex and awesome banjo instrumentals. And we had silly names for them, and stuff. And some of them were so clever. And I wish I could remember them, but I can't. And I know we recorded them on a tape somewhere, but I don't know where that ended up. But I wish I could find it, because I'm telling you, we made some music that was cutting edge for that time. It really was something else. And we built a repertoire. We must have written, and it started out innocently enough, because we were talking to each other as musicologists. We were saying, okay, so where did Scruggs draw all this from? He wrote so many tunes, and then other banjo players are writing tunes, and that music is just for banjo. Theoretically, you can't really play Foggy Mountain Breakdown on any other instrument but the banjo. You can play it. You can play the melody, or the idea of the melody, but to have it really sound the way it sounds, you can't get that out of any other instrument but a banjo. And so we started exploring the process of writing banjo music, and that's how it came about. And we probably made about 6 or 8 really good instrumentals, really good. I remember playing them thinking, man, this is so cool. And we would occasionally end up playing them for people and jamming, and him and I started to form a group. It was just that simple. We were starting to become a performance item, and we had all of the, that kind of, that flair, that rock and roll flair, right? So we decided to call ourselves, instead of the Blues Brothers, we decided to call ourselves the Bluegrass Brothers. And we wore fedoras and dark Ray-Ban sunglasses, just like the Blues Brothers, and black suits. And we went out and performed like that. And 2 of the performances that we did were actually at Parkview, because Parkview had a very active arts program, and they would have variety shows in this huge cafeteria with a full-on stage, box stage, full production. And I remember the first time we went out, we brought the house down, and it was mostly kids that were there. And then another time we did one, and we brought a bass player. I can't remember his name. He was a super nice guy and a brilliant bass player. And we put together this show that was built around the banjo and guitar stuff, but then we also did a little bit of Doc Watson, a little bit of rock and roll, a little bit, it was just a really eclectic thing. And I think that really affected how I developed my own solo career when it came, because I remembered how the diversity of what we were doing seemed to be a great percentage of our success. That we weren't presenting just one thing to the audience, we were presenting a number of things and a number of ideas and concepts. And when we would switch out of something and go to something else that was so far removed from that first thing, the audience seemed to revel in it. And so that was the beginnings of my of my stage persona and my stage life and the way I thought about entertaining people. And plus, I was also at this point also starting to get heavily into fiddle. Bruce Oakes brought me a violin and lent it to me, and I learned to play it very quickly. And by the time I was about 15 years old, I entered my first contest. Actually, it was 14 the first time I entered one of the major contests in Nova Scotia. There was two of them at the time. There was the Nova Scotia Old Time Fiddlers Contest, and then there was the other one called the Down East. And I entered it the first year and in the under 15 or something, and came in third. And then the second year I went in to the open class and won the whole goddamn thing. And so that was going on, and that was a whole other arena. Like fiddling, especially old time fiddling, was a very narrow. You had to just do one thing. You couldn't exhibit other styles or ornamentation or anything from outside of old time. It was very prescribed, and it was very structured and competing. Though I hated it, I didn't like competing because I never felt like it was fair to judge somebody on a 4-minute performance when there could be so much more to them than for what they decide to play in 4 minutes. And it was a lot of psychology and a lot of bad feelings. And it kind of sucked. It was like, it sucked a lot of the time. So, but one great thing that came out of that was my lifelong friendship with the piano accompanist that played at all these contests. Her name was Kimberly Eisner, who amazingly would end up marrying another of my heroes who was on Up Home Tonight, the banjo player, Skip Holmes. So Kim and Skip got married, and now they literally live 7 minutes from me. And so they stayed in my life, my whole life. And so, yeah, this is what I mean about this part of the story. There's so many things going on here that it's rather complex, but we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of it here momentarily, I think. I kept on going out to Chris's because it was fun. It was like we had such a great time together. And Chris did something that, again, like there's all these moments, right? I want to get into something deep and controversial. But it really makes you wonder. What happens in people's lives, right? So you decide to go left at the fork instead of right. Or you decide to stop at this point in the road for 10 seconds and you end up missing a fatal car accident. Or what the hell is it that happens in our lives when because the things that I'm telling you, there were so many occasions of absolute perfect timing, it was preordained that these things happened. And sometimes, and I'm not a religious person, and I don't subscribe to any of that. And but it makes you wonder how the universe works, because obviously you could choose to do 1,000 things in every minute of your life. You could make a choice, How the hell does this keep happening to people? It doesn't just happen to me, but there was just so many things that while I'm telling you this story, I'm looking back at it and going, and I keep saying to you, this person completely altered my life. This person completely altered my life. This, because they did, and I have no idea why or how. That they it was like they knew almost, and this is impossible, right? But it's like they knew who I'd have to meet and what I'd have to do to get where I wanted to go. And the people that did it for me are incredibly unlikely heroes. It would be a different thing if I had been like Justin Bieber, and some record producer or whatever discovered me and made me a superstar. That's a different story. That's the industry influencing art and creating it and creating the artist almost. My thing was just, I had a horseshoe up my ass. I just kept meeting these people that pushed me further and further and further up that ladder. And the ladder was 1,000 miles high, right? So the things at the very beginning of my story seem, at first blush, to be inconsequential, but they're not. Anything that had been missing from this chain of events, I don't think I would be sitting here right now. I really don't. I think there's a vast possibility that it was a perfect storm. And it's like this for everybody. It really is. You can make people come into your life and offer you a fork in the road. And then, and this is the unknown part, why do you choose one of those things, or one of those 4 things, or one of those 104 things? And obviously, we make the wrong choices many times. So, because then you can look back and see, or maybe you can look back, because obviously you go back and look at the turn you didn't make. That turn would have had another 104 options. So that's really deep, but it plays on my mind because of the sheer coincidence of all these events in my life that seem to be patterned to get me where I am right now. And so it's amazing. It really is. So one morning after a big party at Chris's house, he decided to take me just across the street, basically, a couple hundred yards away on the main street of Mahone Bay. There was a bakery there called Mahone Bakery. Baykery, I think it was. Can't remember if he did that or not, but anyhow. Took me over there for something, a sweet roll or a cookie or whatever. We were going to get some food, right? And he introduced me to this guy who pulled up, the owner, who actually pulled up as we were leaving in this old blue pickup truck. And this guy jumped out of the old truck, and this man was huge. He was huge. He was the quintessential happy baker. He weighed probably close to 500 pounds. And he wasn't a short man. He was probably 5'9" or 10. And he was just huge. And and he was wearing all baker whites with an apron on. And Chris introduced me to him. And his name was Murray Freeman. And he and his father, William, were fixtures in that town for decades, because his father was the main undertaker in Mahone Bay for decades. And so here was Murray, had this bakery, and he was just beloved by the whole county, because he made such good bread and sweets, and it actually became a pizza shop later. But the amazing thing about Mr. Murray Freeman was he had one of the largest bluegrass record collections I'd ever seen. And that day in the truck, he had an old milk crate and it was filled with records. And I don't know where he was going with them. And but he said, "Oh, you like bluegrass, do you?" He said, "Well, look at this." And he pulled this milk crate out, and I started thumbing through these records, and I was like, "Whoa!" Like there was so much there that I hadn't seen yet, or names I'd heard of and hadn't heard their music. He said, "Take that home with you. You can borrow them, and then come out to the house." He lived outside of town in a place called Blockhouse. And he said, "Come up to the house after, and you guys come out, and we'll go." He says, "I got about 500 or 600 records." I was like, "Holy crap!" And so that meeting, that introduction, because Chris took me to that place that day, and Murray had that box of records in his truck for some unknown reason. I don't even know why he had them, and I don't think he ever told me. That launched something in my life and my career that just went skyrocket. And you're going to find out what happened next week, because that one moment led to me doing pretty well everything I did after that, which was to make my very first solo album, to go on my first United States tour, extended tour, with that album. And it was such an innocent, moment to meet a guy who loved bluegrass and had some records with him, but it became everything. Also led to me becoming a mandolin player, because Murray was a frustrated musician. He always wanted to play, and he couldn't because he didn't have time to learn. And he had a beautiful Area Pro 2 F-style mandolin that he started to lend me as things went forward. And that became literally my key to unlocking the doors of getting jobs in bluegrass bands in the U.S. Never would have happened if I hadn't met Murray, because I wouldn't have even really paid attention to mandolin. I loved it. I loved mandolin players like Monroe and Bobby Osborne and the guys that I'd heard, and David Grisman and Sam Bush and those guys. But I would have there was nowheres around where I could actually go get a decent F-style mandolin. I wouldn't have known even where to look. I was so guitar-centric. And so, yeah, next week's episode is going to be incredible, because you're going to see how fast this all happened. Like, it happened so quickly that it's just crazy. What went from just standing out in the street with my buddy, one of my best friends in the world, after having drank and partied all night the night before, going from that to here's the guy that's going to launch my career, and I didn't even know it. I had no idea at the time what was going to happen, and how much Murray would end up loving me just like a son or a brother, more like a son, I believe. And he went way out of his way and put his ass on the line for me. And so it's amazing. The other person that Chris introduced me to was his father, Reg, who is possibly one of the greatest entertainers and characters I've ever seen. Great singer, great guitar player, all old country stuff. And we used to go out and see him and jam, and God, he was fun to be around. And still is. He's still kicking. I think he's still doing well. I was out there a few years ago at his house out in Lunenburg one time, had a big jam session all night with him and Chris. And I used to go out there, and there was a song that's not only important to this episode, but to the next one coming up next week. Used to do a song that Doc Watson did. Of course, Doc. It was about a train wreck. The wreck of the 1262. And Reg loved that song. I couldn't get away from Reg without singing that song. That was just the rule. Do the 1262. Do the 1262. And we'd go places. We'd go to variety shows or house parties elsewhere that people that Reg knew, and that would be the first thing he'd ask me to sing for these people that I had never met before. And so that was, thanks, Chris, man. Thank you for not only that, but just, and you're still one of my best friends. And we don't talk very much because Chris is a hard worker and shift worker. I'm doing my thing, but man, it's amazing what a single person that you don't. It just goes to prove one thing, I think. You can never tell the value of someone just by looking at the current situation. People have value in different ways, and you should never discount anyone because of anything. Everyone deserves a chance to do what they're doing and what they're gonna do. And, sometimes maybe that's the answer to why take the left or right fork. Maybe we take the wrong fork sometimes because we don't give something enough time. Or our eyes are closed and we're not seeing what's happening in front of us that could benefit us. I was lucky. Chris is one of my best friends. I trusted him with my life. And the things he ended up doing for me and the people he had me meet, it was a no-brainer. Maybe sometimes that's not so easy outside of that situation. But I think you just gotta keep your eyes open in life. Keep your eyes open in life and don't think that just because somebody's maybe poor or whatever the case, they're not in some huge social echelon, that they're not able to help you in your own personal journey. And they'll never ask a thing for it. Chris never did. Most of the people that helped me never asked me for nothing. Those were the good ones. Those were the good people. And anyhow, yeah, I had to sing that song for Reg. No matter what else happened, the wreck of the 1262 was getting sung, or there was going to be problems. So, I love Reg. She just left the point at Chickeny, the freight number 1262, and on down the mountain she traveled, the men oh so brave in her crew. But the engineer pulled at the whistle, for the brakes wouldn't work when applied. And the brakeman climbed out on the car top, for he knew what that whistle had cried. With all of the strength that God gave him, he tied in those brakes with a prayer. But the train kept right on down the mountain, her whistle still piercing the air. She traveled at 60 an hour, gaining speed every foot of the way. And then with the crash it was over, and there in the tracks the freight lay. Now it wasn't the amount of the damage, nor the value of what the wreck cost. It was a sad scene they found in the cabin, where the lives of two brave men were lost. They were found at their post in the wreckage, where they died when their engine had fell. The engineer still held the whistle, and the fireman still clung to the bell. Now the story is told of a freight train, but it must be a warning to all. We have to be prepared every moment, for we can never tell when he'll call.